Thank you, everyone, so much for joining another Balerion Space Ventures podcast. It's April 21st, and today we're joined with John Quick, the CEO at Launchpad, a very cool company that is leveraging AI to transform the way the world designs, manufactures, and improves products. John, thank you so much for being here today.
No, thank you for having me on the pod.
Absolutely. I want to get things kicked off with understanding your story and how you ended up here. You have a impressive background, and I'm curious about the journey that led you to Launchpad.
Wow, okay. Yeah, it's been a winding route. It's kind of Forrest Gump-like. So my story started in Canada, actually, despite having US and Scottish flags on me. Um, I graduated from business school up in Canada. It's called Western. For most people in the US, it might as well have been Clown College, but it's our best business school in Canada. Went to had accepted a job at Bain coming out of business school. One of the guest speakers for entrepreneurial finance had seen me and asked the professor, like, who do I want to know in this class? And the professor had pointed to me, and he had given this speech about this company, and it was during the tech bubble, and it had gone through all this stuff, and of course this was in hindsight. This was 2003, so the tech bubble had burst, and everyone was shitting on his deal. And I stood there and said, "You have penny stock, the stock, whatever it did, you're in the money. This probably worked out great. I'm sure you did really well on this." And he asked one other person, "Why do you want to do the deal?" Because only four people of 70 wanted to do the deal. And she said, "Because John wants to do the deal." So he came up to me and said, "I know you're going to go work for Bain. What would it take for you to come work for me for the summer?" And so we struck a deal. Instead of going and traveling Europe, I finished my final exam on a Sunday. I started for him on Monday, and Tuesday I walked in by myself to look at buying the Skydome as a 22-year-old or whatever I was at the time, which is ridiculous. So I worked in private equity for the summer. I went to work for Bain. I was at Bain for about 3, 4 years, loved Bain, had an unbelievable time. I was the person who just went anywhere. And so it's one of those funny things that, you don't realize early on in your career how some of your experiences help you later on. So I actually worked on an automation project at Bain, doing a merger integration for two big logistics companies. So DHL and Airborne merged to try to compete with FedEx and UPS. And I actually went and looked at merging their operations and looked at this brand new factory that was multiple hundred millions of dollars and a manual process where you would look at letters and literally slot them in. And we ended up mothballing the expensive one because it was just too much up front, not scalable for all the issues which we'll talk about when we talk about automation. And so had this bug of like, oh my God, this isn't so easy. What do you do? So I went to Bain. I went back. The person who had found me and worked in private equity handed me the keys to a 911 and said, "Is this enough to get you to leave Bain?" So I joined them to help found JJR Capital. We were a merchant bank, private equity. We did reverse mergers before that was cool or popular. We ended up doing the largest one in Canadian history. I think it's still a record. We rang the bell at the TSX twice. From there, I ended up down in Silicon Valley at Vantage Point, $4.5 billion fund. I was the chief of staff to the CEO. I helped raise money. I helped lead deals. I led two of our multi-hundred million-dollar exits. I would write articles for the World Economic Forum and had an unbelievable experience. Vantage Point was very big at clean tech in the time. They were the ones who did MySpace, sold that to Fox for three-quarters of a billion. Had an unbelievable experience, was there for the better part of a decade. And towards the end, I found that I just was thinking differently than a lot of my colleagues. And so I was the youngest person on the investment committee, and I brought a deal called Relay Rides, which became Turo, where we could have had half the company for $2 million. And we got it voted down. And when discussing it, everyone's like, why would anyone want to share a car? And I was like, people who don't have a lot of money would share cars just because that way they have a car. And, it turns out that I was the only person who even had a Facebook account. And this was, I think at the time, like 2015. And so it wasn't, there was a billion people with Facebook accounts, but I was the only person in this venture fund with a Facebook account. And so I left to go try and do Series A and early stage deals and do things that were a little more just different than what the bigger firm wanted to do. And so I went to go start up a fund with a partner, a friend of mine. We went and started to raise money, got commitments, had our first close basically right in front of us. And then he passed away, unfortunately. And that hit every key man clause ever written. And so as I was picking up the pieces, I started getting phone calls of, hey, I've got this M&A thing in China. Would you take a look at it? It's a quarter billion offer. I need to find out if it's real. And so I started doing this mix of venture and consulting. And one thing led to another. I got asked to help turn this company around, which I did successfully. I then got asked to run another company. And while this was happening, a friend of mine named Yoav was introduced. I got introduced to my friend Yoav from a guy named Roy Renani, who had started a company called Chorus.ai on my couch. He was a friend of mine from Bain, and he had built this company on my couch, which he sold for 500 million. And so as he was doing his global victory tour, Yoav, myself, and him had lunch, and Yoav started talking about this idea and this thing he was building where he was doing manufacturing. And Yoav's original idea with Launchpad, which he'd started with, was this idea of contract manufacturing in a box of robots that you basically send a napkin and it sends you back product. And having gone through these experiences in my life that led from vein to merchant banking to to venture to entrepreneurship and being a CEO, I said, instead of looking at automation and trying to do everything for all people and deal with inventory and all stuff, why don't we just get the robots and have the robots drop in and do that? And that's when that transformed, and that's when I joined, and that led to Launchpad, and that led to me being at Launchpad.
Wow, that's an incredible journey. So maybe you can help us explain what exactly is Launchpad? What are you replacing or improving today in the typical workflow?
Sure. Um, we've had robots and automation for 30 years. And if I asked you, Aidan, to guess what percentage of manufacturing tasks are done by robots, what would you say?
I would say 30%.
3%.
Wow.
Okay. So it's been around and no one's doing it. Now, if you're Ford and GM, you can afford to do it, but if you're everyone else, you don't. And the reason why is it's just crazily expensive. So you would call up a systems integrator, they would charge you $100,000 for the privilege of speaking with them. They would then come back with a plan. You'd spend another 100,000 or more developing robots, and then all of a sudden they deploy it. And if you have a job where you're paying someone 40, $50,000 a year, you're not spending hundreds of thousands of dollars on a robot, so you just don't do it. And so as an industry, it's been around, and so someone needs to do something to change and fundamentally rethink how we do automation. And by the way, the reason I differentiate between the giant companies and the small companies are in the US, what percentage of factories, there's 64,000 factories, what percentage of factories do you think are small businesses?
Majority of them, I'd say.
Do you want to guess a number?
Um, 50,000.
95%.
Oh, wow.
So you were far off. But yeah, so 95% are small businesses. So, if you think of it, we live in this world where most companies don't have roboticists or CTOs or all this money to go spend on it, let alone this idea that you would, redo everything from start to finish. So they're not doing it. And so the whole reason we exist is to kind of democratize automation. So the whole goal of Launchpad is we get a CAD file, we put it in software. A software uses AI, but it's consider it computational geometry. That's a screw. If that's a screw, you need a screwdriver. Now let me simulate every possible screwdriver. Let's take out that piece and let's go do the next piece. So it takes it out piece by piece, which means it can put it back together. And so you have software which says, here's the best way to go assemble it. Here's what we can do. Here's what we can't do. And it basically provides instructions that then go to our digital. Digital is our robot. And our robot is built like a Mr. Potato Head. I don't know if you had one growing up,
Sure.
but Mr. Potato is this idea of one toy being really thousands of toys. And so we build a robot instead of having to build a brand new robot each time. Excuse me. We have a robot that is standard form factor, fits through a doorway, controlled area, and it just enables you to basically leverage a lot of that design into other places. And so you've got a robot where you don't have the huge upfront cost, you don't have the same development and deployment costs, and all of a sudden you can do a robot where I can affordably deploy a robot into the field at a lease of 50 to $60,000 a year, or sell the robot for 150,000 to 200,000 profitably. And all of a sudden, you're now at a price point where people can do it. And so you're looking at a tipping point where we've had automation with very slow adoption. And again, totally based on price, capability, the risk reward. And now we have a value proposition that people can get behind and people want to do.
Got it. Very interesting. So as I think about just manufacturing in general, you know, with a lot of hardware technology, it's the main bottleneck, choke point. I was wondering, what do you see as the biggest part of that choke point, whether it's the people, the process, the software, or just the limitations of, you know, having a scalable manufacturing process?
So let me give you two, which I think are the main two. I think there's lots. So that there's, one of these things you could bring up a lot.
Sure.
One is people. So there are currently 600,000 open manufacturing assembly jobs in the US. Okay, that
Wow.
number is expected to be 2 million by 2030. It's expected to be 3 million within 10 years. So when people say the people, the answer is there just aren't people. And if you're giving people a choice between going and working at a factory or driving an Uber, people are choosing Uber. One of our customers is a factory in Texas, and you can imagine, 100-degree heat in the summer, how many people want to be in a manufacturing environment? Their churn is 20 to 40% per year for employees. So it's not even finding people, it's just even keeping people. And so, when you look at robots, you've got a problem that if we want to expand, right? If we want to do things, we simply can't. There are currently 14 million people in manufacturing in the US. There are 140 million people in manufacturing in China. So if we start thinking about reshoring or, industrializing or bringing people back and bringing jobs back, we can barely make the stuff we have now, let alone all the extra stuff we need to make. So that's number one. The second thing is automation, and I'm going to get myself in trouble. Automation is stupid. And what I mean by stupid is people make automation go here, do this. It's fixed. And so if you change things, if you iterate, if you move things, it's now by definition obsolete. It's obsolete the day you deploy it because that's not how we've thought about and how we've created automation historically. And so, for example, in space where people don't make hundreds of thousands of rockets, there's usually this generation and the next generation, there's small changes. You're not going to invest in automation that you have to throw in the garbage and restart. It just doesn't make any sense. And so when you start thinking about automation, instead of I'm going to do a very fixed pattern thing and I'm going to have it go here and be very static, instead thinking of it as I'm teaching it skills and I'm making it adaptable. And all of a sudden, when I have automation that says instead of me going to this XY coordinate and screwing, I'm now using vision and I'm going to go and find a hole, calibrate and screw. Well, now I can iterate. Now I can do high mix, low volume. And all of a sudden, I've completely changed what automation can economically do and the functionality of what it is. And so people are a problem for manufacturing and automation that makes sense given the practical realities of how people build and develop products over time. Those two things are coming together and are problems, which is why we have the issues we have.
No. So are the winners in this space the ones who iterate the fastest, or is it the ones who design the best? And how does that look long term?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think it's definition of what is best, right? And I'm, showing my age, like you think of VHS Beta, right? Beta was objectively a better technology. VHS won because they got out to market, they became affordable, and best was subjective because best was availability, price, and all these other things. I think when you look at manufacturing automation, I think the companies that iterate quickly, the companies that are doing things that do what customers want are the ones who are going to be successful. And so you look at the early success stories in defense tech, and it's companies like, I'll just point Neros as a great example, a company that's doing really well. They looked at it and said, we have a pain point. People need drones. The existing ones are expensive with long lead times. They've gone through something like, what, 10 generations in 2, 3 years or whatever it is. It's, there's a company that said, we're going to go fit a need. And as the needs evolve, we're going to evolve with them. And I think they've done an incredible job of building something people want and adapting to the circumstances.
Got it. So would you say your early customers right now are the scrappy startups that is who can benefit the most from Launchpad? Are there primes in there as well? Is it somewhere in between?
So we have a good mix. So we have some scrappy startups we're working with. We've been doing very well with defense primes. It turns out that if you're a defense prime in the US, you can't outsource to China. Who knew? You also don't have the forward visibility on a lot of your programs, right? Because a program that has to be requisitioned each year or renewed, you can't afford to upfront massive amounts of money upfront if you don't know you're going to be able to amortize that over multiple years. And so there's a definite interest. I think when you look at a company like ours, um, one, obviously, robots can't tell secrets. Two, the fact that we can adapt and iterate. The fact is, because we use and the way we develop our technology, uh, I don't have to see everything inside the hood on a particular company. So when you look at ITAR and EAR and CMMC and some of the DFARs and the military stuff, I actually have some products I can build without actually knowing what the product is. So I can get drawings or I can get certain components and figure out how to assemble it without having to know what it is or what it's for, which allows everyone to keep their secret safe and allow things to be done in ways in which make people very comfortable and make them happy.
Got it. So if I was a startup and I didn't have a final product, but I was very close to having, hardware technology that was near going to full production, would that be the ideal time to bring in Launchpad, or would I wait until I have the complete final production product and I just want to scale up and build as many as possible?
No, I think early would be a good idea. I would look at Launchpad, and the way I would think of Launchpad is think of brownfield instead of greenfield. So where I look at Launchpad is like, what's the biggest problem you have in this factory? We want to go automate that. And we want to know what we can do and what we can't do. I think the problem people have is when they think of automation is they're looking at these bet the company decisions, right? I'm going to go spend $2 million to build a fully automated line to do this. And oh, if I end up this thing's more popular, I now have a problem that I've got taken this big risk. We look at automation as take it to non-decisions. So in every factory, there's someone doing this. Someone's screwing something in, or someone's grabbing something and putting it in a box, or doing some kind of manual thing that's repetitive, that's boring, that's problematic. That's the thing we want to go automate. And when you automate that, instead of saying, hey, give me hundreds of thousands of dollars up front and hope I deliver, or telling them that they need to bet everything, and if it doesn't work, you stop things. What we say is, okay, that job is 50,000 a year at 70,000 a year with benefits. You have 10 open recs over here that you need filling. Take this person, go do the other work. We're going to have a robot do that, and you're just going to pay the robot 60 flat. You're going to save 10K a year. And by the way, if you don't like the robot, fire the robot the way you could fire someone. Just get rid of the robot, we'll take it back, or we'll have the robot go do something else. So you've effectively taken what was a board level, career defining decision and you've made it a non-decision. It's no longer C-suite. It can be, but it could be the factory manager, it could be the product lead, it could be the CTO. You've made it so now it's available to anyone and it's an in fact, it's a non-decision.
Got it. And where are you seeing the most pull from? Is it commercial space? Is it defense programs, defense startups? Is it energy companies? Um, all the companies you're taking in, is there a theme you're seeing where, one category is definitely making up the most of your customers?
Yeah, I think defense tech is really big right now. I think you're seeing a lot of money in the space and a lot of people are trying to aggressively scale up, both in the US and in Europe, UK. I think space is picking up. I think that they're looking at, as you've gone to kind of microsats and other pieces, you're seeing people who now are doing units in the thousands or tens of thousands and all of a sudden need solutions to go do it because a lot of the stuff's being done by hand and that doesn't make a lot of practical sense. I think you're seeing a lot of traditional industries. So we've seen some consumer electronics. You're seeing some things like I've got robots helping build windows and doors, literally just fastening locks and latches. I think it's something where the challenge is not, I don't think of the world in verticals like defense or space. I think of fastening, gluing, inspection. Like you're building capabilities. Like if you can install if you can screw in a satellite, you can screw in something for the military, you can screw in a consumer device, you can screw in a door. Like it's the same function, right? You have a gantry moving, you've got it going down, you've got it fastening. It's about identification. It's about being able to do it, 99.9 times out of 100. And you're building capabilities that really go across different areas.
And how big or small can this really get? Can this be applied to a company that's making printed circuit boards that are very small and also be applied to a company that's manufacturing large ships in a shipyard?
Yeah, look, I think it all comes to the answer is yes. The short answer is yes. So I think you can do a lot of things. I think, one of my biggest challenges as CEO and one of the biggest challenges of the company is being ruthless and pragmatic about what to do now versus what to do later. Because you can get all kinds of different projects. And the trick, especially in a company like ours, where you have limited resources at the current moment, is install people. And so it's knowing what are easier projects what are harder projects. I think, when you look at, ships, like there are certain things being put together on ships or planes that are the same as everything else. And so the question is, can you get access to it in the right way? Is it easy? And how much do you have to adapt for the various things you do? What I would give you as examples are things like liquid being food grade. So we've worked with medical device companies and have, that kind of level of rigor. Food is a different one because you're dealing with food and waste and cleaning. You've got all of a sudden all these other complications in your automation. And so I think the trick is knowing where you can fit in and where you can add the most value without stretching too far from your core. I think you build your core robots that do certain functions and then you start moving from that core. Obviously, for the right customer, of course you're going to do it. But the trick is doing it in a way in which you can take that machine and that basic scope of what you're doing and know that you're going to be able to sell hundreds of robots doing that exact same thing instead of something that's a one-off.
Got it. Now, Launchpad, you're you have offices in the United States and you have an office in Europe as well. What are the biggest differences between the two that you've seen?
Yeah, people in Europe selfishly want things like weekends and evenings and vacations. I'm being completely, before I get clipped and canceled, like I'm being completely facetious, but no, I mean, look, it is a little bit of a difference, and there's a different culture, and candidly, it's a different mindset, and it's something you have to reconcile. I think that startup life and very pragmatic, like go build and start breaking things and figure it out, and then fail and then try again, I think is ingrained in the culture here, and people get it. I think in Europe and the UK, it's much more of we want things to be perfect and we want to make sure it works and we don't want to put something out that isn't going to be exactly, the right way. And I think that it's a good thing and it's a bad thing. It's a good thing in that you care about the quality of your work. It's a bad thing in that, you know, it's like the 80-20 rule. Like you get 80% of it done pretty quickly and that last 20% is really, really tough, especially in manufacturing. And so the problem is you could spend years doing that last bit. And so how do you find that balance between I've got something which is now here, I'm hitting the spec, I'm hitting the standard, I'm doing what I said I did. And yes, there's always going to be more, but it's kind of like, George Lucas always said, movies are never finished, they're just abandoned. At what point are we saying, okay, we're here, and now let's think about the next machine or the next iteration where we can start implementing some of those things?
Got it. Let's go back in history and look at the manufacturing in the United States and our greatest moments and some of our lowest moments.
Okay.
Where was it where we became, ultra dominant and on top of the world with the technology and the scale of that technology that we produced? And as time went on, what happened there?
Sure. I mean, I think everyone has their own opinion, so I'll just caveat mine. I'm sure there's going to be a
Sure.
historian
Yeah.
who's going to come back and correct me. But look, I think American manufacturing exploded post World War II, right? And it wasn't hard to figure out why, right? When Europe was decimated and USA had all the factories going, I think World War II is one of our shining moments of, factories that were building whatever they were building, started building this. It was just everyone, all hands on deck, do what you can. Everything was flexible and adaptive, and it was get things done. And I think that we built a manufacturing base, we built capability. And when the post-war era came and it came to rebuild and help, we had that muscle. You look at John F. Kennedy, we will send a man to the moon and back. We're doing this. And I think that was a shining example of American ingenuity and accomplishment and was unbelievable and something we should all be very proud of. And so I think that manufacturing was part of who we were. It was part of our DNA. It was looked at proudly, like, oh yeah, you work at the plant, you do this, and it was part of our culture. Uh, I think unfortunately we got away from that, and I think there's reasons why, and it's not to point fingers at people, but it went from we care about building stuff, we care about doing stuff to we're going to go work at this layer here, and that's kind of beneath us for whatever reason, right? And it was okay if we outsource manufacturing. We can sell it. We'll just someone else will do that. And I think that you look at industry after industry, and I'll just use steel as an industry. China said we're going to do steel, and they took the bottom end of the market. They took the crap contracts that no one wanted. They did the low quality, and everyone laughed at them and sneered at them, saying we're just going to go up market and do the high end stuff. And all of a sudden, China slowly got better and better, and they moved up market and up market and up market to the point where China now is very dominant in steel because they cut their teeth doing this, and eventually they worked their way up. And I think they looked at that as an industry that mattered, and that's something that they wanted to have, and that was important to them, and that was what they needed. And I think that, as we think about where we are, we went from an industrial society, 30% of GDP was manufacturing. We're now sub 10, right? And the same thing happened in the UK, the same thing happened in all these other, G20 nations where manufacturing was kind of an afterthought. And I think in a world where COVID happened, in a world where the Suez Canal, the Strait of Hormuz, where things get shut down and people say, well, wait a second, we don't produce our own goods. What happens if someone turns the tap off? People said, well, we need to do this here. We need to figure out how we can have it. Now, at the same time, bringing manufacturing back isn't so easy. The average factory worker in the US makes $50,000 a year. It's not what you pay in China, and that's not what you pay in Vietnam and India, who want to be the next China. And if we want to bring and manufacture things here, there's also a practical limit. TVs used to be $3,000. No one's going to pay $3,000, $4,000 for a regular TV anymore. It's just those days are done. So all of a sudden, you're stuck in a world where unless you figure out how to economically do something domestically, you're just not going to be able to do it. And what that means is you've got a shorter supply chain, which helps. You've got to figure out how to handle, some of your costs, and labor are one of those costs. And so if we want to bring all the manufacturing we can back to the US, you're now going to be in some hybrid form of robots and humans. And I think that's the important thing here because, the one message, and, I think my marketing team would, grab me by the mouth and drag me off the pod. It's not about taking jobs. And I think that's a very important thing when people think about automation. What automation is, it's enabling humans to do what they do best. There are certain tasks that we just shouldn't have people doing, right? Doing this, getting carpal tunnel, just time after time. But there are certain tasks that humans are really good at, the machines are really bad at. And so, how do we create factories of the future which blend those two? And we put humans in high leverage spots where they can add a lot of value. We put robots to do the monotonous work that no one wants to do. And the combined structure of those two things together provide us with the most leverage, the best cost structure, and allow us to be globally competitive and candidly win.
Yeah. And as things progress and we're rebuilding, we're coming back at it with a different approach. This physical AI approach, these robotics and advanced manufacturing techniques to help us scale. But we're still not really there yet. And recently, you were on a panel at the NVIDIA conference, I believe last month, where you were talking about the three computer problem. Can you dive a little in depth of what the three computer problem is and kind of what you went over on this panel discussing it?
Okay, yeah, happy to. And I think we've got a bunch of things all tied together. So I'm gonna go high level, but please don't think I'm ducking your question. I'm trying to just answer three questions at once here.
Oh, you're fine. Yeah, my apologies.
No, no,
Sometimes
no,
I
it's
catch
all
you
right.
on.
It's yeah, it's one of the things you're like, wait, there's three. Let's uh so look, one of the challenges is we have an issue where there's where everyone wants to go and there's where we are today. Okay. And the issue is we're looking at digital twin and simulation. Digital twin is this idea of I've got a robot doing something here and I've got a complete perfect replica here online where I can then play and manipulate and then apply between the real world and the simulated world. And the sim to real gap is something you're trying to shrink and you're trying to figure out how do I make all this work? And one of the problems is we're not there yet. And it's not a secret. It's everyone will acknowledge it. And I think one of the things you need to do, and one of the things that we do as a company is really trying to figure out how do you get to deployable. And it's something that sounds easy. It's very complicated and it's a bar that is actually extremely high that people don't always realize. And so the way I would kind of highlight it, and then I'll go back to the why and the how and the what we do. If I'm putting together a window and door frame, okay, it involves 8 screws, 2 screws per lock, 2 screws per latch, 8 screws uh, per window frame. If I'm 90% successful in screwing, I have a 50% yield on my factory. Okay. Think about that math. If I'm 90%, right, one of every 9 screws fails means I have 8 screws per one. Every other one's failing. If I'm 95%, okay, I'm still failing one of every three. Okay. When you build things in the real world, the bar is extremely high, right? No company alive is going to say scrap one of every three of my product to manufacturing waste because you're at 95%, not 98 or 99 and a half. Yeah, you're smiling because This is the bar we are in the real world. It's not software. So in software, I did something, it's got a bug, I send a patch, no big deal, right? Physical AI and physical hardware is very different. When you're building real products in real world, like there's real scrap, there's real wasted time, there's dollars, and you just can't pull it out of the ground and start over. It doesn't work that way. And so when I look to do simulation, this talks about three computer problems. The big thing is everyone's trying to create the simulation, the perfect, the everything, and you've got all these other issues that go along with it. Well, close doesn't work, right? If close gets you to 99% or 98%, and that means one of every three products are messed up, you don't have a product. You have nothing to sell. No one's going to want what you do. And so when you start thinking about some of the things we're doing, so I was on the panel with Bill Voss, the CTO of Booz Allen. Okay, I'm not envious of his problem. He's got to have simulations that work in space, that work under sea, that work in cold climates, that work in warm climates, that all these things and all things to all people and all these adjustments and all these other variables. Uh, it's crazy. Like it's just the amount, just my brain hurts thinking about what they have to go through. So when I look at Launchpad, one of the things we do and how we solve this problem is we're really focused on a narrow set of things. And so we say, look, we have a 1 meter by 1 meter box, which means we have a completely constrained environment, which means I know exactly what's happening inside this environment. I don't have to worry about different lighting. I have to worry about different temperatures. I have to worry about random stuff coming in. I have to worry about all these other variables. It's kind of like the meme with the horse, where you see it really being well drawn, and then all of a sudden it's a stick figure the rest of the way. Okay. The amount of compute, the amount of knowledge, the amount of everything done long term for everything to be perfect is so the bar is so high and going to be so expensive that you need to figure out how do I simplify things, especially now to be able to get things to done. So really at its core, Launchpad is saying we are going to take something that is incredibly complex that can be as difficult as you want it to be, and we're going to focus on doing things that we know we can do really well within a very constrained set of parameters because then it's easy to take on from a problem set. You look at humanoid robots that people want to build, and they're going to be all things to all people, right? The promise of humanoids being able to adapt to do everything in every different environment, in every different way, in every different possible scenario. Just think about what that entails and what that would be. Something we talked about screwing. When you screw something in, I have to grab a screwdriver. I have to hold it. I have to find the screw. I've got to thread the screw. I've got to tilt it to find the hole I'm putting it in without it falling off. I've got to make contact with the ground. I've got to torque it, not too much, not too little. I'm inspecting it. I've got to remember there's so many steps that go in are very specialized. And so I'm laying all this out, and it all ties back to the talk we had in NVIDIA, which was if we want to get things to real in the real world, what is it going to take? How do we get there? What are the things that need to be in place for this all to happen?
You know, what's a prime example of one of the industry leaders of just absolute amazing manufacturing processes?
Whew, very good question.
Doesn't have to
Uh,
be the number one, but someone in the top 10.
Look, I mean, just because it's in the news because of Tim Cook, that look, Apple is unbelievable in the way it manufactures everything, but even the way they think about manufacturing. And it's someone who just intuitively understands every aspect of their business. And without getting too far into it, because I just want to be careful about when you start talking about other companies, but the amount of care they spend in all the little details. So just even gluing, I'm going to run 1,000 experiments of every possible iteration, configuration, everything, just to make sure I have perfect. If I'm going to install something that is going to go in one of my lines, I'm going to install something. I'm going to have something standing right beside it in case it goes wrong that I slot in. I'm going to have something in the back so I can ship this back. So the amount of care, the amount of attention to detail, the amount of backups to the backups, I mean, they are, you know, gold standard top to bottom.
Yeah. And when I'm thinking about, the best of the best, was there a moment where a company may have led the charge by introducing automation into manufacturing like never before, like maybe with Toyota in the past? And maybe you could share a little story or an enlightenment so we know, what some of those critical moments were that changed how manufacturing is today.
So there's an anecdote I'm going to tell, and I probably shouldn't because I'm not 100% sure it's true, but I've heard it from multiple people, so I'm hoping it's true, and I don't get hit and told I'm a liar or totally off base. But um, so you mentioned automotive. Look, Toyota obviously had its day, the JIT and everything, but I think Tesla's done a phenomenal job of rethinking automotive and manufacturing, and I think they've done a great job. A lot of Elon's companies, but one of the things I heard, which I'm not sure is true, is that a lot of the self-driving, one of the first things was to be able to self-certify each car. And that the car was able to drive off the line and get it self-certified because if you individually certify it, there was a lot of benefits to that. And that instead of batching certification, all of a sudden self-driving opened up all these other possibilities within the factory, which again, I hope is a true anecdote. Someone can please correct me. I'm sure I'll get slammed on Twitter for not knowing all the details on this one. But I think the key thing here is, and I saw it in an interview the other day where they were comparing, buying a Tesla to buying, to Amazon, and then, in Amazon you needed 6 clicks to purchase something or whatever it was, and in Tesla at that time you needed like 25 or 30 clicks, and the answer was how do we get down to 6 clicks? So I think manufacturing, purchasing, everything has been done and looked at in that company for how do we optimize, right? Instead of saying we have to do this in this very linear way, how do we all of a sudden say, well, if we have this come together here and these things become just snap on, all of a sudden we've made our lives easier. And so they've done a way in which I think a lot of their decisions have been made in a way in which makes it easier. Two examples I would give. One example, in Launchpad, we want to have an interface that helps our customers and our partners know exactly what's going on in the machine and be able to look at it immediately. Okay. And I had given it to an industrial designer who works with me and said, look, you need to figure this out and go do this. And they came back with something which was very robust and it could survive on, I think you could take a baseball bat to it and it would work. And I said, what are you doing? Get an iPad. And they looked at me like, are you crazy? I said, First principles. What is it that we need to do? An iPad is like $200. An iPad has a camera and video. So if anything goes wrong, you can take video and send it back. It has Wi-Fi and can communicate. It has everything we need to do. Why would we invent the wheel? And the point here is if it's just there and it's going to have, we can give it its own display and we can do all this other stuff, but why not go for simple? Why not go for easy? If you have a problem with an iPad, you just send another one in the mail. It can be there in 2 days. Why would you create a supply chain and logistics and all these other issues, given what you want to solve for is a very easy, implicit UI? When I went to hire someone to go design the UI, I hired someone at a Rockstar who did video games, who'd worked on Grand Theft Auto and Red Dead Redemption. Because, you know, yes, we're industrial, but why wouldn't you want something that looks beautiful, that is easy and intuitive and clean? And so I think that to me is the kind of mindset that someone like Tesla brings to manufacturing that I hope we try to emulate, which is let's be creative in how we solve problems. Let's make our life easier. How do we take a problem? In fact, I think I gave one of my engineers a heart attack. We had an issue where when a client went on a machine, if the client were to e-stop the machine and reset it, there could be a problem. Not e-stop, so e-stop. There was something you did post e-stop that was going to cause this problem. There was this fault that would happen if they did these very specific things that was going to cause a big problem. And I said, okay, in what scenario would they ever do that? And they were like, well, it'd have to be this, and they really shouldn't be doing it this. I said, oh, great. So if you take away the button that gives them the capability of doing this, then they'll never start the machine without it being calibrated because anytime it does this, you can automatically calibrate, which means this is a non-issue. And they looked at me and they said, well, yeah. And I said, great, problem solved. And I said, but I haven't solved the problem. You said, what do you mean you haven't solved the problem? The problem will never happen now, right? And they're like, well, yeah. I said, good. So the problem is solved. If this only occurs under these very certain set of circumstances, you've tested all things around it, we're not worried about this reoccurring in other areas, and we've taken away the circumstance in which it now exists, we're done, right? We can move on to the next problem as opposed to spending hours trying to figure out what's going on here. And it was funny because to you and I, that's very pragmatic. And to them, it was like you could see them getting uncomfortable. Like, no, I have to do this.
Sure. So I'm thinking about this and, going to all these companies and helping them improve their process with your platform. What becomes your moat? What's say maybe a competitor is just a consultant who can go to a place, have a catalog of all different types of robotics, take a look around and say, this is the robot you need for there. And how do you look at that and say, well, we have a moat because more of a network effect or,
Yep.
something like that?
So, so what I would say is anyone who has to do systems integration is already got a problem. And the reason I say that is if you look and say, I'm going to have this robot arm and this thing over here and this thing over here, all of them are created in different languages with different protocols and everything else. And so to make them all work together, you need to integrate those things. Because if there's a millisecond of latency of this is supposed to do this, but then it hesitates, something can go wrong. And so Having someone be able to pull a bunch of stuff off the shelf, you now have a very different cost position, right? Because you have a consultant who comes in, is going to do the quote, is going to need to charge hourly for all that development work. And now you've got a bunch of robots that you've got to make work together, which you also have to charge for. So your whole cost position is already 50 or 100% higher than my cost position. The whole reason we exist as Launchpad in our mode is the fact is if you can use software and AI to very quickly figure out what it is to go do, you now do that a lot lower cost. Those are savings you can pass on to a customer. If you have a robot that is built with the idea of how do you make it plug and play, right? Like the old Intel laptops, just plug in and it works. You're now looking at something different because you've already solved that problem of how do I integrate that? And you've spent time and energy to make sure that that's easy. So you don't have to redo that every time. If someone's doing it for the first time, there's a learning curve, there's a cost. If you already have it basically built out and done, all of a sudden that's something I can do for my customers to be better, faster, cheaper. To me, what the future looks like is if you are in a factory, you can come in and you can send me your CAD file or you can take a photo or video, and all of a sudden my software says, here's how you're going to build this. Here's the steps that Launchpad can do. This is what the robot will look like. Would you like me to send you one? Right? When I can go from discovery to here's a robot and the robot's there 2, 3 weeks later. Today automation takes months. I know that different people say different things, but it's a multi-month process. When automation can be weeks, and when automation can be days, that's your mode. The mode is here it is, right? If someone wants something, great, here it is, no problem, right? I have a robot that, does this. Well, all of a sudden you need to do this. Great. I just have to send the robot the file. It can visually do it. It knows the adjustment. It teaches itself doing, both real world experience as well as simulation. Now it does all these, it ties them together and it just does it and it's ready to go. Game over.
Yeah. Okay. I want to get your opinion about the hardware development competition with US and China. Um, are they ahead of us? Are they behind in certain ways? Is it that they just have more people? And where do you see this going in the future?
Okay. Um, for anyone who hasn't done business in China, it is amazing how quickly things can work. So you can sit there an hour outside of Beijing in a small area that there's a rice field, and they're like, that'll be an LED center next year. And you go, what do you mean? They're like, that's going to be the LED center. And then a year later, there's a brand new, beautiful building built, ready to go, done. Not starting to be built, not permitted, not approved, built, done, doors open, ready to go. Okay. If you look in China, they've got obviously a cost advantage when it comes to labor to build stuff. That's just a different price point. They've also gone and spent a lot of money on fixing energy. And so if you look in China, that they have a lot of renewables, very low cost of energy. They've realized the future is energy. And if you are the country with the lowest cost energy, that is a cost position savings that touches everything else you do. They've also provided a lot of loans and financing to certain companies, the same way they bought market share in solar, LEDs, electric cars, and other things. And so if you look at the Chinese cost position and you say cost of capital gone, cost of electricity gone, cost of labor fractional, that's a pretty big and embedded advantage that you've got sitting there. You combine that with a lot of expertise, all the things that are being built right now, all these areas and pockets that are there that have really strong backgrounds in history and people that know what they're doing. And it's a pretty formidable combination. So China is number one when it comes to robots. They're number one in deployment of robots. They're number one in a number of industries based on history and precedent. So I would say that they are a very formidable competitor. I think in the US, the answer is we have a lot of things that are going for us as well. And I think that we've got, when you look at the market, you look at who's doing a lot of the consuming, you look at a lot of the thought leadership and a lot of the intelligence and stuff there, you look at there is an ability to do it. So I think that if the US wants to compete and wants to be part of it, it absolutely can. It just has to go and say, we're going to go do this. And I think that you look at some of the money, you look, Bezos is running, raising $1 trillion fund for manufacturing. You look at a lot of the money that's going into physical AI. I mean, there is no American manufacturing future without robots and automation. It just period. But when you see companies and ones doing it, the Hadrians of the world, the Machina Labs, there are people building and creating. And I think that, we need more of that. And I think that we have an entrepreneurial spirit. We have a willingness to experiment and fail. And when things are working, there's a lot of money and capital that gets poured into it to help scale rapidly and be very globally relevant. And so I think long term, I'm bullish on US manufacturing. I think there's a lot of things that have to go right to get there. I mean, I should caveat that saying I've been bullish on the Maple Leafs for my lifetime. That hasn't panned out, but I think that everything that you need to be successful in manufacturing exists in the US if we're ready to do it and if we're ready to have the will and we're really to ready to fight. And usually will and fight are two things the US is really good at.
Got it. Yeah. Say if you were advising the US government about manufacturing and this competition we have with China, what are some areas that we're really underestimating about China? And what do you think should be done as in the first steps to getting back on track and pushing forward our production capacity and rebuilding our arsenal?
So I think the first thing that we need to do in the US is make sure we have all the raw materials and all the inputs that we need. And I think that they've done a very good job of identifying certain companies, whether it's rare earths, whether it's certain minerals, magnets, others of saying, hey, how do we invest in enriched uranium? So, Scott Nolan's company. So they've looked at a number of areas and said, hey, this is critically important. And if 80% of the world's supply is overseas, we're screwed. And so I think the US government has actually done a very good job of thinking through what are these areas and how do we start investing so we do have a domestic supply chain and we do have our own, I don't want to say captive is the wrong word, but we have our own supply that we can access, which is housed domestically in the US or wherever else. So that's the first thing. The second thing is we need scale. Okay. So, I look at Launchpad. If I had an order for 100 robots tomorrow, my costs would halve. Okay. 50% my cost base I could drive down. And so I think that the US government needs to find the companies like the Launchpads of the world and say, okay, this is important to what we're doing. We need to go do this and we need to go make this happen and we need to go get this deployed and scaled because having adaptable, flexible, high mix, low volume robots that you can plug in quickly, fast, cheap is going to make our economy. Let's make sure these things go and happen. The third thing is we need to invest in the crazy. And when I say the crazy, um, to me, and I'm going to sound nuts, and I'm okay with that. People haven't thought that already, they'll think it now. But the factory of the future is something entirely different than what we have right now. Humans design things very linearly, right? This step to this step to this step. It's the Taylorization, right? Henry Ford and all that other stuff. Instead of a factory that does this, why would we not have a factory that has stations that do various things? And we have robots that can move things back and forth. So instead of saying, you need for this line, we need a screwing machine. For this line, we need a screwing machine. For this line, we need a screwing machine. Why wouldn't you have a factory with 4 or 5 oh, let's go here, here, here. Okay, now let's move it here. So you might have a factory that literally looks like things flying all over the place because you can now with AMRs and other stuff move things from station to station. And so instead of this idea of one factory for one product or one suite of products, it's now factories that are completely flexible and adaptable that can move things around. In order to do that, that's going to take some experimentation and everything else. And I think one of the things the government's good at is putting the money to go out and do those and figure that out and work out the kinks so it can be deployed at scale and deployed commercially.
Yeah. And thinking about the future, we don't want the next generation to be left behind because we didn't act in the moment right now of setting them up for succeeding. What are some things we can implement today that will grow in the next generation? And I mean this by maybe something to inspire, you know, youth or programs that are like Launchpad. And I, first of all, I think Launchpad should be bigger, and I think you should have more competition. We need a lot of you guys because this problem is huge. So if we were to set something up so that the next generation doesn't have to pay for us being slow, what would you want that to be?
So what I would say a couple of things for the next generation. And what I would say is we live in a world of immediacy and everything is heightened as far as its importance or its scale. This is the biggest thing ever, the biggest problem. I would say that, you know, the world was powered by whale blubber That's what did lighting. And that went away within a period of like 2 or 3 years, and everyone figured out new ways to do things. There was a world in where one of the big jobs was street sweepers or horse and buggies, and people made whips and buggies and had to scoop horse shit off the streets. And that went away in a 4 or 5 year period. And all of a sudden, there were different jobs and different things. And so I think with every wave of innovation, there's a fear that the new generation is going to be left behind. There's going to be no jobs, and there's going to be nothing for people to do. And I think that that's been disproven time and time and time again. I think we have a problem in our economy right now where we had a apprenticeship style model where people who were young would come in, they'd learn the ropes and they'd grow and they'd evolve and they'd be able to do things. And I think that that to me is being somewhat broken, which is in a scary way for the people who are young right now, in the sense of, if you were a lawyer, you would go and learn the trade, and then eventually some would become partners, some would go off and put up their own shingle. If you were a consultant, if you were a bank, there was this apprenticeship. Even companies in software, it was like you had to learn, and a lot of AI right now is replacing kind of junior programmers in a way that you don't get that experience. The flip side, I would say, is it's easier than ever to start a company. It used to be hundreds of thousands of dollars to start a company. It used to be very expensive to do anything. And now it's actually very easy and fast to go out and build, create, grow, scale, play around. And so, what I would say for people who are young, participating in how we think about the economy and jobs and growth is now's your chance to go and do something and go create, experiment, try. And that the resources to do that are no longer insurmountable. And it is actually democratized and available to a lot of people. I would say that physical stuff is never 100% going away. I think that, you look at this idea that all the robots tomorrow are going to do everything and no one's going to touch anything. I just don't think it's true. I think you've got a big, you go to a lot of these talks with fellow roboticists or people working in companies, and the idea that we're going to have the perfect machine that is the Terminator that does absolutely everything in the next 12 or 24 or 5 years, I think is a misnomer. And so there are a lot of jobs that are going to exist as you start thinking about where the world's going. There are industries that are going to be growing and scaling. Like, we're going to need more energy. Someone's going to have to figure that out. And where do we go build it? How do we do that? How do we maintain it? How do we create it? How do we capture it? How do we share it? How do we optimize it? So I think there's a lot of places for people to go. I think the youth of every generation, I think, when I think about, like, I'm that last generation, I didn't have a cell phone until I was in college, right? I didn't grow up with it. There used to be travel agents. You'd call someone to figure out how to book travel. So again, if you're looking to go into the previous economy's jobs, yeah, those are going to go away and those cycles happen faster. But then that begets a whole new cycle of jobs. And I think that people who are younger today have a better ability to go out and do that, to take those risks, to try them out and to figure out what those are, and to go, where things are going as opposed to where they've been.
Yeah, I love that. Thinking about this, if me and you, if I were to have you back on the podcast 2 or 3 years, we could definitely have you back earlier, but if I were to have you back 2 or 3 years, what would you say has to be true for you to say that Launchpad truly worked?
Ooh. Um, Look, I think everything in any company comes back to happy customers. And I understand that's kind of taking a softball approach to this, but the most important thing we need to do as Launchpad is deliver, and then deliver again, and then deliver again. And I hope anyone who works with me or invests in me hears that. So I think that you can build the greatest technology in the world, but if it never goes out in people's hands, then it doesn't matter. So I think for Launchpad to be successful, our mission and what I judge myself on is, how do I make it super easy for everyone to have automation? How do I make it so that any factory alive can literally sign up for automation the same way you can rent a car or sign up for home insurance, where it takes a couple of clicks, a couple of photos, and you're ready to go? So that's my mission, to make it that easy to get automation, and then make sure on the back end that we're able to quickly, okay, that's what you need, great, put it together, have it, vision-based, self-programming, self-developing, and get it out the door quick. So if I can do those two things, we're going to be massively successful. And that's what I wake up in the middle of every night thinking, how do I do better?
Fantastic. And as we're wrapping up, for anyone listening to our conversation, if they were to walk away with just one key takeaway from our chat, what would you want that to be?
I think we've talked about a lot of things in a lot of direction. I think just because we ended with kind of youth, I would say, if you'd asked, I remember being in Chicago with friends when I just graduated college, talking about where we wanted to be. And my friends were like, "Oh, we want to go live in San Francisco and do this and do that." And I was like, I love Toronto. I grew up here. I love it. I think it's amazing. I want to, you know, have a job and be growing and doing this. And then my life, took me to Silicon Valley. It's now taking me to LA and Edinburgh. My wife, who's everything, and my kids, like she's the girl I met the first day of high school, and it took us 25 years in reconnecting in California to get together and then get married, which is insane. And so what I would say is that, life isn't linear. And if you'd asked me when I was at Bain whether I'd be a CEO of a robotics company, I would have thought you're crazy. Um, you know, Things take you in different directions. I think, the important thing, and this is for everything, is just you know, be thoughtful, be hardworking, be adaptable, and look for opportunity. And I think that, this is another example of it. If you'd asked people who wants to do hard tech or hardware 10 years ago, they would have laughed at you. 5 years ago, you probably would have got laughed at. Hardware was a dirty word. Now all of a sudden people want to be in hard tech and physical AI. So I think that things move and everything else. And I think the important thing is sticking to what you believe in, first principles thinking of, is there value? Is what we're doing important? And is what we're going to do create value for our customers, our partners, and the people we work with? And if you can figure that out, you're going to usually end up in a pretty good place.
Fantastic. Well, John, thank you so much for taking the time today. This has been a awesome conversation. There's a lot of takeaways here, and I just want to thank you so much for being a part of this.
No, my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
All right. Thank you, everyone who sat in on this. See you next time. Take care.